Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast, and welcome to your AEW Dynamite post show, man. And there is a lot to talk about in today's episode. We get a return of an AEW legend himself returning back to AEW Dynamite. It's got a lot of people talking. We'll talk more about that in today's episode. Obviously, we get some more little storyline progression, if you will, going into this weekend's Dynasty. And we'll talk more about that in today's episode as well, man. But let's start off the night. We see Tony Schiavone in the ring. Tony Schiavone, who's pretty much there to do the contract signing for the highly anticipated matchup between AEW World Champion MJF and Kenny Omega. So Tony Schiavone's in the middle of the ring. He's trying to talk, but all of a sudden Pyro keeps going off in the background. Schiavone looks confused and pissed off. So Schiavone's sitting in the middle of the ring. All of a sudden, we hear Chris Jericho's music. Everybody's looking around. Where's Jericho? Where's Jericho? Jericho ends up showing up. The crowd erupts initially. Jericho comes out to the ring. He's trying to hype up the crowd, but the crowd seems split. Jericho then is waiting for his huge ovation, but he's not getting it. But then Jericho grabs the microphone and says that AEW, I'm home. A couple of things, and we'll talk about this, and we'll talk more about this at the end of today's episode, man. Number one, it's good to see Jericho back. I mean, a lot of people, myself included, we're speculating, on where Jericho was going to go next. Now, this is something where Jericho, before he took his hiatus for about a year, I had a lot of people talking. Obviously leading up to him taking his hiatus, a lot of the fans were, chanting, hey, it's time to retire, it's time to go, it's time to hang up the boots and walk away, it's time to retire. So a lot of people were, at the time, kind of, fed up and done with Jericho because it was the same shit week in and week out with the, Jericho Appreciation Society, or mainly the Learning Tree when Jericho was teaming up with Big Bill and Brian Keith. A lot of people were really getting tired of that same old stick that Jericho was doing. You know what I mean? It just wasn't working. A lot of people were just getting fed up with it, and really the Jericho Learning Tree experiment really wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. And it got to a point where a lot of people were getting tired of seeing Big Bill, Brian Keith, and especially Chris Jericho. So Jericho took this hiatus for, I would say, almost about a year. And it got a lot of people talking. Obviously, Jericho's contract with AEW, what people thought, was coming up. But according to a lot of, news and speculation, Jericho's contract was actually frozen with AEW for pretty much about a year. And during that time, before it was announced that his time got frozen on his contract, it had a lot of people talking that Jericho was actually going to go back to WWE. So initially, and especially how things were lining up for WWE, you had Gunther in this whole retirement tour. He was retiring legends like Goldberg, John Cena, just recently AJ Styles. So initially a lot of people probably thought that Jericho was going to go over to WWE and he was going to retire from Gunther. And Gunther beating him in a match maybe at WrestleMania, and then Jericho was going to get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. So we get to Dynamite last week, and, we see Jericho, and Jericho just, doesn't really say much. He just says, hey, AEW, I'm home. So to me, it seems not only is Jericho back in AEW, but there's also been rumors and rumblings around, the internet space, if you will, that Jericho actually signed a contract extension with AEW. Now, again, this is just a rumor or speculation, but I think the biggest thing with Jericho at this point, and I think a lot of people are saying the same shit, is the fact that what's going to be next for Jericho? I know a lot of people are clamoring for a match between Jericho and Kenny Omega. I don't think Omega and Jericho really worked together in the match yet in AEW. I know they had, a match in, obviously, New Japan, which kind of kickstarted AEW. So obviously, I don't think Omega and Jericho has worked together. I don't even know Jericho and Okada has worked together yet either. So there is some matches still on the table for Jericho. Obviously, AEW has brought in some more talent. We also have Takeshita. Jericho and Takeshita would be a hell of a match as well. So obviously, AEW is bringing in new talent, and they're going to continue to keep doing that off and on for the foreseeable future. So this kind of opens up the door for Jericho. We can also get Jericho versus Andrade. So, again, it's something where I feel like the Jericho, experiment with him coming back, I give it maybe, and I'm being generous when I say this, I think with Jericho returning back to AEW, I think the fans will be, all for it for maybe 5 to 6 months, depending on how it goes for Jericho. Because this is something where at this point, Jericho really is one of those guys, one of those individuals, I would say, for AEW that literally has done it all. You're talking about a guy who's been with AEW since day one. He was at the press conference in Jacksonville. He was, at that time, the biggest signing for AEW. And honestly, I think Jericho's one of the guys that really brought AEW to the dance as far as them being on TNT and TBS. It was a big-time name for AEW, and honestly, it was one of the biggest names at that time that came over from WWE over to AEW. And Jericho's been with them ever since. They've been, pretty much inexistent. So, I think Jericho, if they do it correctly, Jericho could have some decent matches. Jericho has been a part of some of the most best storylines in all of AEW. But it depends on how they book Jericho, being Tony Khan and the powers that be, that really will get the fans invested into Jericho. We're also talking about an individual that, with Jericho, he likes to reinvent himself every time he comes back. He filed a trademark for the Cornerstone, I think, or something like that. And Jericho has, progressively and constantly always reinventing himself into a new character or somebody else. So we're going to see how it plays out. I mean, obviously he didn't get a huge ovation from the crowd that I think he wanted when he returned back to AEW. But, my thing is right now with Jericho and all the people that are like, man, I wish he would have gone to WWE. I'm going to be honest, and this is not me being a WWE hater or anything else like that. I don't know with how things are being run right now in WWE right now. And obviously they're a little bit more leaning towards the money aspect of WWE than they are creatively. I don't know how Jericho would fit into the fold, man. There's matches on the table for Jericho in WWE. I'm not ruling that out. And there's a lot of great matches on the table for Jericho, but the way things are running over in WWE right now, it's not really promising right now for someone like Chris Jericho to go in, get squashed by Gunther, and then retire, be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that's it. You know what I mean? And maybe Jericho saw the writing on the wall, and maybe that's the reason why he stayed with AEW or possibly signed a contract extension. That's something that's also been rumored. And there's been rumblings on the fact that maybe Jericho has, signed a contract extension with AEW. Again, it's just a rumor. But again, it's something where we're going to see how this plays out for the next 5 or 6 months for Jericho. And hopefully it pans out well. Hopefully they can put him in some serious storylines, some good matches. And despite everything that Jericho has done, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're talking about a guy that's been there since day one, the first ever AEW World Champion, and some of the best storylines of all of AEW. I mean, he's literally done it all in AEW at this point. So now it's just a matter of, okay, well, Jericho's back. How can we utilize Jericho correctly and put Jericho back in the main event scene in AEW that actually is meaningful and it's going to mean something for the fans? And not for nothing, I mean, right now the main event scene for AEW is red hot. I mean, you got Swerve, Ospreay's back, you got Kenny Omega as a new number one contender, MJF's the world champion. They're trying to push Brody King as well. Kyle Fletcher also wants to have a match against MJF as well. So the main event scene right now in AEW is red hot. So how do we slot in someone like Chris Jericho into a main event scene right now that is red hot? So we're going to see how it plays out. I think Jericho actually is going to be talking more about, I guess, his plans being back in AEW on this week's episode of Dynamite. So I'm looking forward to that. But like I said, man, it's great to see Jericho back in the confines of AEW. Moving on from that, we go to the backstage area. We see Ospreay attacking Jon Moxley as well as Wheeler Yuta. Obviously, there's some unfinished business here between Will Ospreay and Jon Moxley. Now, a matchup between Ospreay and Moxley will happen at Dynasty. But there was also news that came out that this match is not just going to be your standard singles match. Instead, this match will be, for what I understand, for the Continental Championship. So it will be Will Ospreay taking on Jon Moxley at Dynasty for the Continental title. So some interesting stuff there. A little added stipulation to the matchup between Ospreay and Jon Moxley. Moving on from that, we finally get the MJF and Kenny Omega contract signing. MJF and Kenny Omega come out to the ring. They both sign the contract. MJF then goes to talk, but Omega tells MJF to shut up. Omega then mocks MJF. Omega then says the fans are here to watch the best wrestle. Omega says that he wants the AEW title, but he also talks about the injury that almost cost him his career. Omega says that somebody needs to make sure MJF never gets the AEW title again. MJF then grabs a microphone, finally gets a chance to talk, questions that if Omega is at 100%. MJF then mocks the fans, but MJF also mentions Kenny Omega's good friend Kota Ibushi, who is currently out with injury. MJF then says, hey, do you guys know why Omega wants the title back so bad? MJF says that Omega's diverticulitis is not over. Instead, it's really bad. MJF then says Omega would have been better off dead. After this, Speedball Mike Bailey is here. He's trying to stop Omega from attacking MJF. Bailey says that without Omega, there is no AEW. That means that MJF should respect Kenny Omega. Bailey then says that Omega is a living legend. And then Bailey said he wants a match against MJF tonight. Omega says that he'd rather miss some of his intestines than his balls. And it looks like we're going to get a main event matchup here between Speedball Mike Bailey and MJF later on in the night. Moving on from that, we have a six-man tag team title match. A six-man tag team matchup is the Demand, taking on Kenny Omega, Brody King, and Jack Perry. The match itself was a really good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams with the Demand keeping the pace of the match. Perry hits a moonsault to the outside, taking out everyone on the outside. Omega hits a moonsault for a near fall, followed by a step-up enziguri. Omega then hits multiple Snapdragon suplexes in the middle of the ring. Brody King hits a senton on the Demand. Ricochet then gets involved by hitting a springboard 450 for a near fall. Omega then hits a V-trigger, but Ricochet hits a Poison Rana in the middle of the ring. Brody King then goes to the outside, hits a crossbody on Tona over the barricade through the Timekeeper's table. Ricochet then hits his signature Vertigo for a near fall. Perry then hits a running knee, but Omega hits a V-trigger, and then Omega hits a one-winged angel, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Kenny Omega, Brody King, and Jack Perry. Hats off to Omega, King, and Perry for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go backstage. We see Copeland and Cage, and Renee's trying to get an interview with Copeland and Cage. It looks like Cage was going to attack Renee, but Copeland said that they're there to look for FTR, and they want to beat the shit out of FTR. So Copeland and Cage are on the hunt for FTR, but they can't find them. Instead, they find a locker room. They open the door, and next thing you know, they see Roppongi Vice, Trent Beretta, and Rocky Romero. After this, Copeland and Cage quickly attack Roppongi Vice, leaving them helpless in the backstage area. So it looks like Copeland and Cage has some unfinished business with FTR. And moving on from that, we get our next match of the night. Highly anticipated matchup. It is Will Ospreay taking on Pac. Pac comes out to the ring first. Ospreay then is making his way out to the ring, but he's quickly attacked by Pac. Pac then hits a brainbuster on Ospreay onto the stage. The doctors are checking on Ospreay. Ospreay then gets in the ring. The referee sounds for the bell. Match gets started, but the match itself was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Ospreay and Pac, with Pac keeping the pace of the match. Pac then was going after the injured neck of Will Ospreay, but Ospreay gets up, hits a springboard forearm, followed by a handspring Pele kick, landing on Pac for a near fall. Ospreay then follows it up with a brainbuster, followed by a 450 splash for a near fall. Ospreay and Pac then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Pac hitting a moonsault off the apron into a DDT on the outside on Ospreay, followed by Pac applying a brutalizer in the middle of the ring, but the hold is broken. Ospreay then tries to get some offense in by hitting a powerbomb for a near fall, followed by a devastating Styles Clash for a near fall. Pac then hits a Hurricane Rana into a roll-up for a near fall in the middle of the ring, followed by a Tombstone Piledriver, landing on Will Ospreay. Pac then goes to the top rope, hits a Black Arrow off the top rope, followed by a Brutalizer, but Ospreay ends up hitting a roll-up on Pac, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Will Ospreay. After the match, you can see Pac attacking Ospreay. Ospreay hits a hidden blade, though. The Death Riders are here. They attack Ospreay. Claudio is here. He puts Ospreay's head through a chair. Claudio then goes to hit a foot stomp on Ospreay, but Moxley stops him. Moxley then grabs a microphone that says tonight could have been a real bad night for Ospreay. Moxley says next time use your head, or next time you might lose it. Moxley then tells Ospreay this is not personal, and tells Ospreay don't make this personal. Definitely looking forward to this highly anticipated matchup between Ospreay and John Moxley. And moving on from that, we have a women's tag team matchup. It is the Triangle of Madness. Tekla, Julia Hart, and Sky Blue taking on Mina Shirakawa and the Brawling Birds. The match itself, it was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams with the Triangle of Madness keeping the pace of the match. Mina hits a running knee, but Jamie Hayter hits a Hater Raid on Julia Hart. Pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Mina Shirakawa and the Brawling Birds. Hats off to Shirakawa and the Brawling Birds for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we have Darby Allin. Darby Allin comes out to the ring. Darby says, "Why are we playing games with the Don Callis family?" Darby then hopes Omega beats MJF because he's tired of MJF's bullshit. Darby then calls out MJF, but instead the Don Callis family are here. Don says that MJF has paid him a lot of money. Don says that if Darby beats a member of the Don Callis family, Darby could get his title shot. Don Callis then announced that it will be, in fact, Andrade taking on Darby Allin at Dynasty. Don then sends the family after Darby, but Darby fights off the Don Callis family. Brody King and Perry are here to help Darby, and Kenny Omega comes out to help Darby Allin as well. Some interesting stuff there between Darby Allin and the Don Callis family. And moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of AEW Dynamite. It is MJF taking on Speedball Mike Bailey. The match itself, I thought, was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between MJF and Bailey, with MJF trying to keep the pace of the match. Bailey lands multiple kicks, followed by Bailey hitting a running shooting star press, landing on MJF in the middle of the ring for a near fall. Bailey hits a moonsault to the outside, taking out MJF. Bailey then goes for a springboard maneuver, but MJF counters it with a power bomb for a near fall. Bailey then hits an acai moonsault to the outside, taking out MJF, followed by Bailey hitting another moonsault knee drop off the apron, landing on MJF. Bailey then takes a page out of Kenny Omega's book with a Snapdragon suplex, followed by a devastating spin kick. Bailey then hits another moonsault knee drop for a near fall. MJF then gets up, hits a tombstone pile driver off the apron, followed by MJF hitting a heat seeker on Bailey, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is MJF. After the match, you can see MJF attacking Bailey. Kenny Omega, who was on commentary, he rushes the ring, and MJF walks off. Some interesting stuff there from your AEW World Champion, MJF. Couple of things I want to talk about, man, as far as AEW is concerned before I get the hell up out of here. Number one, solid show, man. I mean, honestly, I mentioned this earlier in the beginning of the show. It's great to see Jericho back. And I think that's the biggest vocal point coming out of AEW Dynamite is the return of Chris Jericho. And like I told you guys earlier, man, I'm excited for Jericho to be back. But my thing is, this excitement's, I think, only going to last maybe 5 to 6 months, depending on how this plays out for Jericho. Obviously, there's still some, a few matches left on the table for Jericho in AEW. There's Kenny Omega, I believe, Okada, Takeshita, maybe even Kyle Fletcher. I mean, there's some matches now on the table that will be interesting for Chris Jericho. But we're also talking about, an individual that's, up there in age, man. I mean, Jericho's no spring chicken anymore. So, and the way AEW and the way they're starting to develop, it's a very high-paced development kind of matches, man. Like Kyle Fletcher, he's 0 to 60 miles an hour, in like 2.3 seconds. I mean, that guy is like Roadrunner in the middle of the ring. So, it's interesting to see how Jericho will play out in the main event scene. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, is how Jericho is going to be factored into the main event scene. Seemingly, Jericho now is hopefully on his own, that there is no more learning tree, because we all know that we do not need to see that shit no more. To see how it plays out with Chris Jericho. I mean, Jericho, again, has been in some of the most predominant storylines in all of AEW. We're talking about a guy that's been there since day one of the biggest acquisitions in the existence of AEW. One of the biggest names from WWE to go over to AEW, and, the show has gone on since then. But he's been there since day one. I mean, we're talking about a guy that was there in Jacksonville for the AEW press conference when AEW was announced to the fans. So, and I think Jericho really did help them get into the doors. I think Jericho really did help them get a deal with TBS and TNT as well. Jericho played a vital role in what AEW has become, for sure. I mean, he's definitely one of the pillars of AEW, whether you like the guy or not. My thing is with Jericho is how are we going to see this play out with Jericho now that he's back? And again, Jericho had, I believe, a year of time frozen on his contract, so he's not going to WWE anytime soon. And like I mentioned earlier, the rumors and speculation are the fact that Jericho might have even signed a contract extension or a possible new contract with AEW. So Jericho has no plans right now to go back over to WWE for the foreseeable future. And honestly, I mean, I don't blame him. Yes, there are things on the table, obviously, over in WWE that would be, very interesting and very entertaining for Jericho to have over in WWE. Absolutely. And I think that's the other biggest question mark going into this. If Jericho did sign a contract extension or a new contract with AEW, then how is it going to play out for Jericho? Because Jericho, we're talking about someone that has seemingly done everything in AEW. We're talking about, one of the biggest acquisitions going to AEW, the first ever AEW World Champion. I mean, has been a part of the biggest storylines in all of AEW. There's really nothing else left for Jericho to do in AEW at this point. So, I mean, a lot of people are like, you know what, it's great to see Jericho back, but how is he going to fit into the main event scene right now? Because, again, Jericho's been away from AEW now for seemingly about a year. And AEW is starting to pick up the pace, especially in the main event scene right now. So, how does Jericho fall into place with the main event scene? How does he be a new number one contender for the AEW World title? What storylines are going to have any kind of meaning for Chris Jericho moving forward? And definitely, there are some matches on the table. I mean, even though Copeland and Cage are in a tag team, I would not be against seeing Adam Copeland versus Chris Jericho in AEW. I'm not against that at all, and maybe, hopefully, we do see that. It'd be a hell of a match, I think. But how is this going to play out? I think, obviously, that was the big vocal point coming out of AEW Dynamite. We get the MJF Kenny Omega contract signing. There's actually people out there right now that are hoping MJF drops the belt to Kenny Omega. And I'm going to be honest, man, I think that's a bad decision right now. I think MJF right now is one of the main reasons why AEW is kind of getting back to what it once was. I think MJF is doing a hell of a job carrying that AEW World title. And whether you like the guy or not, every time MJF comes out to the ring, grabs a microphone, you're going to want to sit down and listen to what this guy has to say. This guy is a pillar of this company. This guy is honestly one of the big names in AEW that gets a lot of people interested in AEW, to be honest with you. So I think taking the belt away from MJF right now is just a bad idea. MJF should hold on to that belt until, I would say, All In. Now, I mean, obviously we also hear from Will Ospreay. Will Ospreay, the rumors are that the matchup between him and Moxley is for the Continental title. To me, honestly, that doesn't make a lick of damn sense. That belt should have nothing to do with this matchup between Ospreay and Moxley. The only thing that I can speculate is maybe that Ospreay wants to be unified world champion. Is this something where AEW is entertaining an idea that Ospreay beats Moxley for the Continental title, and then maybe Will Ospreay wants to have the unified championship by beating Okada? Because you got to figure, man, we have Dynasty and we also have Double or Nothing coming up late May. So is this something where it's going to be Ospreay versus Moxley? Ospreay beats Moxley. Ospreay then has a match with Okada. Once again, we get the unified championship and have Ospreay as a unified champion going into All In. Again, doesn't make a lot of sense. And I also think we're, not too far from the Owen, too. A lot of people speculated that Ospreay would be in the Owen, win the Owen, and that would get him the number one contendership for MJF's AEW World title taking place at Wembley at All In. So I don't know how this is going to play out if, in fact, Ospreay does beat Moxley at Dynasty and Ospreay becomes a new Continental Champion. So there is some confusion going on there with Will Ospreay. But again, the matchup between Ospreay and Moxley should be a hell of a match. We got Andrade versus Darby Allin announced for Dynasty as well. And I'm going to be honest, and I've said this since day one, ever since Andrade has come back into the fold of AEW, this version of Andrade is 10 times better than the original version of Andrade that we got in AEW when he first came in. Andrade looks more hungrier, he looks more dedicated, he looks more focused, and he wants to be there. He wants to be AEW World Champion. He wants to be the top guy in AEW, where I felt like his first stint in AEW just was very, very lackluster. And AEW really had no plans or knew how to utilize Andrade. Now, Andrade is one of the top guys in AEW. A main event star in AEW, a future AEW World Champion. So, again, Andrade versus Darby Allin should be an amazing match to see. Now, with that being said, this whole thing with Darby wanting to go after the AEW World title, look, I'm a fan of Darby. But in my honest opinion, Darby has not done jack shit to get him an opportunity at the AEW World title. Now, that can all change if he does, in fact, beat Andrade at Dynasty. But again, I mean, to me, I think the whole experiment with Darby Allin has kind of fell flat, bro. I made comments about Darby now for the past couple weeks. Man, Darby was, a top guy in AEW. A lot of people were talking about Darby when Darby was teaming up with Sting. That retirement match that Sting had at Revolution, it was a tag team matchup between Darby and Sting against the Young Bucks, I believe, for the AEW tag team titles. It was a hell of a match, and it was a hell of a send-off for Sting. It was one of the greatest retirement matches I've ever seen. And after that, Darby, Sting retired. Darby took a hiatus. Darby, climbed Mount Everest, and he was off the scene for almost about a year. I think it kind of hindered Darby's, career in AEW a little bit. It kind of stole the fire away from Darby Allin. And Darby came back into the fold, and Darby really hasn't had a lot of singles matches, man. A lot of it's just been him dealing with Gabe Kidd or the War Dogs or the Death Riders. He really hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't really solidified himself as a number one contender. You know what I'm saying? And I just, maybe it's a day late and a dollar short for Darby Allin, man. Call me crazy, but I just think it's one of those things where maybe that whole idea of Darby Allin being AEW World Champion right now is just not the best thing, I think, for AEW. It's not. If Kenny Omega beats MJF, am I against it? No. But do I think MJF needs to beat Kenny Omega? Yeah. I think he needs to hold on to that title until we get to All In. Now, the Will Ospreay situation, him going up against Moxley for the Continental title, I don't know how that... I don't even know why that title was even on the line for this matchup. The match itself is a grudge match in itself. We don't need to add the title to this matchup. It's not needed. And right now, Swerve Strickland also doesn't have a match, from what I understand, for Dynasty as well. So, again, I mean, it's just one of those things, man, where it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out for AEW going into Dynasty and for the foreseeable future. I mean, now we have Jericho back in the fold. Jericho obviously is not going over to WWE. And now the question is how Jericho fits in the main event scene for AEW moving forward. I think that's one of the biggest questions coming out of AEW Dynamite. It's good to see him back, but how long is the fan excitement going to be there? Is it going to be there for as long as Jericho there, or is this going to dwindle and fade out in the next 5 to 6 months where people are like, man, maybe he needs to really retire? You know what I'm saying? So it'll be very telling to see how this plays out for Chris Jericho, because, again, I will remind you that before Jericho took this hiatus, there was fans all over the world, and that were AEW fans that were begging for Jericho to retire because people were just tired of seeing Chris Jericho. They were tired of seeing Chris Jericho. They were tired of the learning tree bullshit with Big Bill and Brian Keith. So it is going to be very telling to see how things play out for Jericho now that he's back in AEW. So it's definitely going to be intriguing, definitely interested in seeing what's going to happen next for Chris Jericho. We had the contract signing between Kenny Omega and MJF for the AEW World Championship. That match will take place at Dynasty as well. We got Jon Moxley versus Will Ospreay for the Continental Championship, from what I was told. We also get Andrade versus Darby Allin. We have FTR defending the AEW Tag Team titles against Copeland and Cage. Obviously, there's some unfinished business there between those two teams after what FTR did to Beth Copeland at All Out. I'm going to, put this out there. Maybe, just maybe, Dynasty might be a little bit better than Revolution as an entire pay-per-view compared to what Revolution was. Just saying. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm just saying Dynasty might be a little bit better as an entire pay-per-view than what we got at Revolution. But again, I'm excited for AEW this week. Hopefully we hear from Chris Jericho and why he's back, what his plans are moving forward, why he decided to come back, and what's next for Chris Jericho. Hopefully we hear from Kenny Omega as well, leading up to the matchup at Dynasty with Omega and MJF. And we'll see how things play out going into the final week of Dynamite, leading us into AEW Dynasty. But with that being said, though, this is my review of AEW Dynamite. I hope you guys are out there staying safe, be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.